To start out with, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mandi. I work for Nkonzo Wildlife Research based here in the Western Cape of South Africa. And we are one of the partners of the Expedition Project. And I was invited to spend a little bit of time and sit here and chat with you guys about something that is important to conservation while we are all on lockdown and social distancing. So tonight's topic is just going to be a bit of an overview on how tourism, specifically wildlife tourism, can be an asset to helping curb biodiversity and wildlife loss. So yeah, feel free to pop any questions you've got at any time, and I'll get to them as I can. I guess to start with, the first question is, well, why do we need to stop the loss of wildlife and biodiversity? Now, if you're in this chat, if you're following pages like this and involved in groups like this, you're obviously already interested in conservation and biodiversity and wildlife. But just as a bit of an example or a bit of the formal reasons why biodiversity and wildlife is super important to us. So obviously there's the intrinsic value of it's here, it has a right to exist in and of itself, and we should try to protect the assets that are on our planet. Another reason is that biodiversity means greater sustainability. So the greater the biodiversity of an ecosystem, the more sustainable that ecosystem is. And ecosystems each play an important role both in and of themselves and to humanity as a whole. Wildlife supports these healthy ecosystems. So, you might think, or some people will sometimes think, oh, it's just one species. We just lost one species of bird or frog or something like that. How can that be a big deal? Well, the thing is that if you lose one species, it might not be a massive issue right away. There's likely going to be another species that can fill the niche and keep doing what that species was just doing. But the problem is if you think of this kind of like a plane, okay? On planes, there's lots of rivets, those bolts that hold everything together. If you lose one, it's not probably going to be a massive issue. It's not going to be catastrophic. But if you lose like 20 or 30 or 100, or in the case of species loss, thousands of species, you've got a bit of a problem now. And it's getting extremely dangerous, which unfortunately is one of the situations that we are in today. For example, a specific example of how biodiversity loss and the loss of individual species can actually harm humans. If you look at Lake Turkana in Kenya, now this lake, it's a freshwater lake, and it is the largest freshwater lake inside of a desert in the world. Now, this lake supports tons of species. It's well known for its hippos and its crocodiles, as well as its birds and its amphibians. Now, what also is very important to this lake is the fact that there are over 300,000 people who directly rely on this lake to not only survive, but to make a living. Now, the problem that they're running into is that with climate change, biodiversity loss, changes in the rain patterns because of climate change, also because rivers are being diverted upstream, this lake is actually under threat. Now, if this lake disappears, that is going to impact those 300,000 people who are going to have to somehow find a new way to survive that is different than the way that they've been surviving for generations, if I can put it that way. So there's a reason for you. Biodiversity also helps with climate regulation. We all know that global warming is a massive issue these days. So as we all know, the rainforests are disappearing because it's being cleared for farmland and whatnot. So that destroys tons of biodiversity and very unique species that occur nowhere else in the world. But as we destroy these forests, and these mangroves are another great example, these forests and these mangrove forests are great basically holders of carbon dioxide. Now, as we destroy these trees and destroy these forests and these mangroves and stuff like that, we are losing all of this carbon is getting released into the atmosphere, which is then contributing to global warming. So there's another huge issue and another good reason why biodiversity is super important. Okay. Biodiversity and wildlife are super important for the economy. Sorry, I have some notes here that I'm glancing at. In the world, okay, so this is the entire planet, not a specific country, not a specific area. This is the entire planet, okay? Over 40% of people, and over 40% of the world economy, okay, relies directly on biological resources for functioning. Now, that's not just wildlife, okay? That is water, that is natural resources such as oil or gas or things like that. But still, 40%, that's a lot. And if we start really damaging our ecosystems, this whole thing's going to come crashing down. The Another reason that biodiversity is super important is when we lose biodiversity, we lose something called ecosystem services. Now, ecosystem services are essentially anything that we humans get from the environment that it provides for us. So this is things like fresh water. This is things like food. This is grazing land for livestock. There's a myriad of them. I mean, there's entire courses dedicated to ecosystem services. So I'll let you look that up on your own. But just an example. Okay, overfishing, it's a massive issue, okay? When we overfish areas, you get oceanic dead zones, and we lose the biodiversity. You can lose entire species from the bycatch and from overfishing. Okay, when we overfish areas, the entire ecosystem, that marine ecosystem, can essentially crash down. Then all of the ecosystem services that we get from that ecosystem are gone. And you can't just replace them. They are a natural resource that we are essentially losing then when we don't protect it. And that's directly related to biodiversity and wildlife protection. If the reasons why biodiversity is super important is something that's really of interest to you, I know a lot of you guys are obviously in the field and whatnot. I want you guys to go look up something called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, okay? You'll find it online. It's quite lengthy, but I highly recommend the read. It goes into this all in detail, and it's a fantastic thing to take a look through. So if you're interested in it, take an evening and go through that. So that's why biodiversity and wildlife is important. And that's just in a very short nutshell. There's entire degrees dedicated to that question. So that's just a quick little synopsis there for you. So the whole point of this talk is, how can tourism help this? How can tourism curb the loss of biodiversity and wildlife? So one of the major components of how it can help is its contribution to the economy. So tourism is a massively growing industry. So when I refer to tourism for the most part here, I'm pretty much just referring to wildlife and conservation tourism. I'm not referring to global tourism such as city viewing. But in this instance, okay, global tourism, now this is anybody traveling internationally for a holiday or recreational purposes, okay? In 1950, just to give you an idea of how much this industry has grown in the last 70 years, okay? In 1950, 25 million people traveled internationally for recreational purposes, so for tourism, okay? In 2017, that number increased to 1,322 million people. So that is an absolutely insane increase of how much this industry is growing. Now that's due to globalism. It's so much easier now to travel across the ocean. Well, before coronavirus, but usually it's really easy to travel across the ocean, which is actually making tourism a huge industry that's helping a lot of people. Now, because this industry itself is growing, this makes it a better investment for businessmen and people looking to invest finances into an industry, because it's more likely to gain a return on their investment, which means if it's a better industry to invest in, it's more likely to get better attention, which means we're going to get more areas to be protected, more natural areas. Excuse me. Another thing that tourism helps do is it actually helps reduce poverty in a lot of areas. If we take Africa, for example, if we take Africa, for example, tourists, yes, obviously they come to the big cities and stuff like that, but they want to come to the African bush, and they want to see the wildlife and these big natural areas. Now, when we protect natural areas here, you need people to help maintain fences and to help with the guests. We need people to cook and to clean and to do all sorts of things. Okay. We need people to do that. Now, you don't necessarily need to be skilled to do that. So tourism actually creates jobs, which helps lift these families out of poverty and allows them to have a more sustainable income for their future and to help, take care of their kids. In Southern and Eastern Africa, so that whole big chunk there, Tourism, now this is wildlife tourism I'm referring to here, accounts for 6% of the total employment in southern and eastern Africa. Now, 6% might not sound like a lot, but it actually is when you think of how many people that would actually account for and how many households are relying on this. Okay. But there are countries that's a lot higher. Namibia, for example, the country of Namibia, 19% of all people and all employment is directly related to the tourism industry, okay, which is fantastic. But that means that it's not only a great industry to invest in and it's continually growing, but it's actually helping a lot of people by creating jobs and giving them a formal income. Now these profits, so it's tourism, so there's money coming in, and you have to pay salaries and pay for this and that and everything. But those profits can be directly invested back into the industry for conservation efforts, which is another way that it's helping. So all of these reasons together, basically, tourism means an increase in economic stability for an area. Now, just an overview, that helps us reduce poverty because it reduces unemployment. People have a way to make a stable income to take care of their families. It can bring them out of some really bad situations by providing them a legitimate way to take care of their family. So it helps support local communities. There are so many great conservation initiatives and protected areas that do tons of community outreach. So it helps not only to provide jobs for the parents, but they get involved with the kids. They do community days where they go into the communities and help teach the kids, or they bring the kids to these natural areas, these protected areas, and they show them the animals and they teach them about the environment and stuff to try and garner more enthusiasm in the local community for this industry, which is also helping, because these kids will then hopefully also want to get into conservation and continue protecting it. And the money that comes from tourism is the way that they're funding that. Then the another way that it helps is the economic stability helps is that it actually can reduce poaching in a lot of ways. Now, poaching, when we hear the word poaching, we all think elephants for ivory, we think tigers for their skins and for their bones, and we think rhinos for their horns, all of which are sold on the black market. Now, another massive side of poaching that we don't hear about nearly as much is poaching for bushmeat. Now, basically what that is people putting out snares in protected areas or alongside the road, anywhere that there's going to be, small antelope or small mammals, or even reptiles, tortoises, mongoose, rabbits, hares, anything like that, or up to, your antelope and stuff like that. They poach these animals to eat because they don't have money to buy food. So tourism, again, creates jobs, creates a stable income. It allows them to be able to buy that, to be able to buy the food instead of poaching it. It also, when people have a stable income, they're less likely to go to a black market sort of setting where they will poach a rhino or an elephant, for example. So it can help in that way, all of which, yes, helps conservation. It also creates a great initiative, or it just, let me rephrase that. It makes these protected areas more desirable. They're a better investment. They're a great way to make money, to support families. They help communities. There's a lot of great things about it. All of these things together promote continued industry growth. Okay. So that means that this growth rate that we saw, from 1950 up until 2017, we went from 50 million international tourists to, 1,322 million. Okay. Now, remember, not all of those were wildlife tourism. Okay. But either way, the statistics are going to hold for just wildlife tourism. It's going to increase for that as well. When there's more money to protect, when there's more money being invested in this industry, there's more likely going to be more conservation and more natural areas being protected for future conservation. Because if people want to come see it, people are going to protect it because it's going to be the livelihood of so many people. Okay. Now all of this is great, but there are definitely some things that when we think about tourism as a way to help protect our wildlife and as a way to protect our biodiversity, there are definitely some things that need to be kept in mind when you are establishing a protected area or some sort of a conservation initiative. A big thing that you often see becoming an issue when a new business is established in a low-income area or a more rural area is that the tourism business will sometimes clash with the local community. excuse me, in ways of infringing maybe upon traditional